Alrighty, good morning, everybody. Sorry for a little bit of delay. Was taking care of some things right there. We've got a great show today. Not only are we joined by an author of one of the best, and I've not even read it, but I know from just hearing from some of y'all and reading reviews, one of the best Vietnam helicopter pilot books written, known as Low Level Help, written by Mr. Hugh Mills. And Mr. Hugh is a retired lieutenant colonel who served in South Vietnam in January of '69 with the first, with D Troop, 1st of the 4th Cav, flying Hueys before transferring to the OH-6s. He ended up coming back for another tour. Actually, I think he might have gone to West Germany, but in September he came back to South Vietnam and was flying Cobras with 3rd Squadron. That's a blank on the Cavalry Regiment, and then flew OH-6s as a platoon commander of
Yeah.
C Troop. He blanked all that out. He's got over 2,000 combat hours. He's shot down 16 times, 15 times in the OH-6. Once in the Cobra, and as I mentioned, he wrote one of the most outstanding books. His decorations include 3 Silver Stars, a Legion of Merit, 4 DFCs, 3 Bronze Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, 66 Air Medals, Air Medal with a V device, 6 Vietnamese Gallantry Cross with silver and palm. Vietnamese Forces Honor Medal First Class, the Vietnamese Civil Actions Medal First Class. And in 2011, Mr. Hugh was inducted to the Army Hall of Fame, and in 2013, he was added to the Arkansas Walk of Fame. Woo pig, woo pig. So I'm butchered all of that, but I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off to Mr. Hugh. Let him give a little introduction to himself, and we'll get started for the day, guys.
Well, Bud, thanks. I appreciate you taking the time. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, April the 8th, 1948. My dad was a high school principal. Lived a short time in Memphis and then moved over to Monticello, Arkansas, down in Drew County, down toward Louisiana. Stayed there through the 5th grade, moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is what I consider my home, about 1959. Graduated in the class of 1966. Bill Clinton was in the class of 1964. We actually were neighbors across the street from each other in Hot Springs. Went off to Arkansas Tech in Russellville, Arkansas, in the summer or the spring of '66. Hated it. Every minute of it. Hated it. Did well in ROTC. ROTC was required in those days of all freshmen and sophomores in land grant colleges in the South. Loved ROTC, and I got hooked up with the Sport Parachute Club and started free fall parachuting. Loved that. So it occurred to me about December or so of 1966 that I ought to think about joining the Army and do those things full time. I was heavily influenced by 2 guys, J. Scott Hamilton, who was right out of Army Special Forces and going to school same time I was. And Richard Clark, his sidekick, also a sergeant in Special Forces. These guys were Halo instructors, and they were in the Sport Parachute Club with me and heavily influenced my decision to join the Army. So I enlisted as an airborne infantryman, did basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana,
Ooh.
and then AIT, Advanced Individual Training Infantry, 11 Bravo, at Fort Lewis, Washington. I don't know why I did that. Everybody else that was going to infantry AIT went across the street at Fort Polk, Tigerland.
Oh, yes.
And for some reason, a typical Army planning, they sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington to do it up there. While I was up there, I was offered an opportunity to go to Officer Candidate School. Selected for OCS in armor and cavalry.
Oh,
So about July 1967, I went off to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And on December 15th of that year, I was appointed as a armor officer, second lieutenant at the age of 19. A little young, but I was enthusiastic. Served at Fort Knox, Kentucky as a reconnaissance platoon commander, training crew members on the M114 recon vehicle for about 2.5 months, and then off to flight school. I did the first half of flight school at Fort Walters, Texas. Flew the OH-23D by Hiller. Most of the warrant officer classes flew the TH-55, the Hughes, which is the baby brother of the OH-6. But I flew the 23 and then off to Fort Rucker, Alabama, now Fort Novosel, and flew A model and B model Hueys, ultimately D model Hueys toward the end of the course, and then graduated in November of 1968 as an Army aviator, and received a set of orders sending me to the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. And I arrived there on the 1st of January 1969. And that's where low-level hell starts. The book actually starts with a mission on Highway 13. I wanted to start it with a bang. And so I took a mission on Highway 13 called Thunder Road. And we started the book there and then backed up and brought ourselves forward. But I desperately wanted to go to a cavalry unit because I was a cavalry officer. And I wandered into country with my old classmate from high school, John Fields. John was an infantry officer, and we wound up at the 1st Division together. My introduction to the 1st Division was not the greatest in the world. I got to the 90th replacement on the 1st of January or so, and wanted to go to the 11th Armored Cav. That was my desire. And so on the first day, all of us got there about the same time, and we're waiting for assignments to various units across Vietnam. And they put the unit assignments up on the board on the first day, and I wasn't up there. And so I waited a second day, and here came the assignments for the 1st Cav Division. And I said, well, that'd be all right. Waited all day. Nope, I didn't get picked for that either. And then on the 3rd day, I was losing hope, and the assignments were posted, and I was posted to the 1st Infantry Division. And I was mortified. A young cavalry officer, I was 20 at the time. I deserved to be in a cavalry division, not an infantry division. And so we waited for our transportation, and the Charger quarters came in to John Fields and I, both going the same place, and said, your transportation's here. And we went outside of the repo depot there, and here's a dadgum green dump truck full of dirty laundry. It's going to Zion, which was the headquarters of the rear area of the 1st Division. And John and I rode up there to Zion and in the back of a dump truck full of laundry. And when there, we were transferred by Huey up to the 1st Aviation Battalion at Milloy, and met with the 1st Aviation Battalion's S1. And the S1 said, Lieutenant Fields, you're infantry. You're going to go to the 1st Aviation Battalion. And Lieutenant Mills, you're cavalry. You're going to go across the runway to the Air Cav Troop of the 4th Cavalry, D Troop, call sign Dark Horse. I was thrilled. I thought that'd be wonderful. And for the first 2 months, I met with Willie Cummings, who was the troop commander when I first got there. And I told him, I'm rated in the Huey, but I really want to fly scouts. I love the OH-6. I'd flown one as a passenger when I was in OCS. really would like to fly the OH-6. And he said, well, we don't have any vacancies, but you can fly with the then the Clowns, the Huey platoon of the Cav troop. And then luckily, in about 2 months, the scout platoon leader was moved over to be the operations officer of the troop, and I was given command of the outcast aero scouts, which I then maintained for 10 months. And that is the basis for the book Low Level Hell. So
wow.
That's what got me there.
Wow. That's that, I mean, and I don't even think I mentioned it, but you're actually the first Loach pilot that we've had on. We've had you know, a few Pink Panthers from the 361st, Cobra pilots. I think we've had maybe 1 or 2 Marine Cobra pilots, but no Loach, and definitely no guys going from Cobra to Loach or any other aircraft. So this is very, very interesting. And to kind of get it started, it's such a different thing from talking to the SOG men or the Force Recon men about the training and the flow of things. You mentioned early on when you joined that you join as airborne infantry, and you go to Fort Polk, Fort Lewis, and then on to OCS with armor and cav. At this whole time when you join, are you working your way to aviation, or did you think you were going to be a armor cav ground pounder?
Well, I honestly, aviation never really entered my focus until OCS. And toward the end of my OCS period, I remember I was a senior candidate, and they put a bulletin board posting up that said, candidates that would be interested in flight school, see the company commander. And so I went down, and he was a 173rd Airborne Brigade company commander in Vietnam. He didn't know anything about aviation. But essentially, you had to have a GT score higher than 110. Mine was 120 something. You had to have a AFQT score above some level. And you had to be able to pass a Class 1 flight physical and take an orientation ride in an Army aircraft. So I was sent down to the airfield at Fort Knox along with another candidate. It could have been John, I don't remember, to take an orientation ride. And the bird they had there was a brand new 68 model OH-6. And it was a young captain in the flight detachment there at Fort Knox. And we took off. I rode in the back on the first leg, and we flew to Bluegrass Army Depot, and then had a cup of coffee and got back, and I got in the front left seat and flew back to Fort Knox. And I was enamored of the aircraft. It was small, it was agile, it was very maneuverable. I really, really enjoyed it. And so that's what got my interest. And then, of course, when I was picked for flight school, you focus on doing the things to get you through flight school. And everybody in those days was graduated first as a Huey pilot. The UH-1 was the most ubiquitous aircraft of the Vietnam War, and to this day, it's the abiding symbol of the Vietnam War. And so I flew Hueys my first 2 months. I only had one humorous story about flying Hueys. In February, the Huey platoon leader, a dear friend named Wayne McAdoo, took R&R to go to Hawaii to see his wife. And so with 1.5, 2 months in country, I was the acting platoon leader of the Clowns, called the Flying Circus, that Huey platoon of the 4th Cav. And I would say that platoon name changed in July of 69 to the 4 Horsemen, but it's the same organization. And I did the smart thing. I picked the smartest warrant officer that I knew to fly in the airplane with me, and That was a guy named Bob Holmes. And we were given an emergency mission one afternoon to fly out and rescue a long-range reconnaissance patrol of the 75th Rangers that had become compromised and surrounded, and they were taking casualties. And so I did a quick briefing with the operations officer, and I got the frequency for division artillery, and my intent was to prep the landing zone, which was about half a kilometer from where this team was pinned up. And so I get a hold of division artillery as we approach the landing zone. We're still some distance away, and I start shooting 105 and 155 into the landing zone to prep it, not only to clear people, but also mines, tilt rod mines, and that sort of thing. And Bob Holmes is in the right seat. I'm in the left seat. I got the map in my lap, and I'm talking on the radio to division artillery. And I can see way up ahead the landing zone, and I can see these rounds going off. And the last round was supposed to be a Willie Pete, white phosphorus. And as we get closer and closer, the rounds are just coming in, black smoke and dirt churning up all over the place. And we hit the final point and turn inbound to the LZ, and rounds are still going off. And Bob Holmes is looking at me, and I'm focusing on the map and the radio. And about 400 yards before we hit the landing zone, this white phosphorus balloons up in the middle, and all rounds are on the ground. We drop our ARPs, our aerial rifle platoon, who are going to go save the LRPs. And we take off, and Bob turns and looks at me, and he goes, "That was fantastic. How many times have you done that?" And I looked at him and I said, "Once." That was the first time that I ever adjusted live artillery in my life. I had never adjusted artillery. If I knew how to do it, I had my little cue card from the armor school, how to adjust artillery. I knew the gun azimuth line and all that sort of thing. And he was amazed that I was shooting artillery into the landing zone. I'd never done it before. Thank God I didn't tell him beforehand. But I enjoyed flying with those are the ARPs right there. Wonderful guys. These guys were the cream of the crop of the 1st Infantry Division. They were hand-selected to become the aerial rifle platoon. They were commanded by Lieutenant Bob Harris when I got there. Later, several other guys came in. We had 2 that were injured pretty quickly, one after the other. And then Stu Harrell came to us from the 82nd Airborne and commanded them till my departure. But 28-man rifle platoon, 4 squads. Each squad had an M60 machine gun. They carried only ammunition and water. They didn't have to carry food. They didn't have to carry sleeping material because they didn't go in to stay for long periods of time. They were inserted into the middle of the worst situations. As a reconnaissance and force element, as a blocking force. In a couple of cases, they were inserted up by the Razorbacks in Vietnam to blunt the retreat of an infantry regiment out of the Michelin rubber plantation. That occurred in September of '69. They were damn near overrun, but terrific guys. I'm still in contact with those who survived, and I'm going to see a bunch of them in June down in San Antonio. We have a reunion every year.
Oh man, that's fantastic.
Door gunners and ARPs and pilots, and we all get together at the Vietnam Crew Members Association.
That is fantastic. Did these guys, since this is this sounds very high speed and heavy duty, as the young kids say. Was there a special ARP training regiment, or was this all OJT? You just did what the job called for?
Most of it was OJT. A lot of these guys, that's Stu Harrell right there in the camouflage, third from the left. That's Stu in fact, that's after that event. That's the day that the Silver Stars came out. That's me on the far left. That's Joe Perkins, the Troop XO. That was kind of a fun story about how he wound up in there. My dear friend, my roommate for 2 tours as a scout pilot, Rod Willis, is in the middle. Stu Harrell, and then Rod Willis's crew chief, Ken Stormer, Gainesville, Texas.
Oh, Texas boy.
On that particular day, the ARPs were in deep kimchi. They were seriously depleted and about to be overrun, and I was able to get in there and help them a little bit, being on top of them. And in the middle of a fairly long engagement, several hours, I came back to base. Jimmy Parker was my crew chief, and the XO comes running out to the flight line and goes, "I want to go with you." Well, when you're first lieutenant, you don't really tell the captain XO of the troop that he can't go. So I told Jimmy, I said, take a break. And I told Captain Perkins to jump in the back and man the machine gun, and off we went. I don't think he realized the degree of contact. He had never flown a scout mission, I know that. And I don't think he was prepared for the fact that we were 10 or 15 feet off the ground, eyeball to eyeball with North Vietnamese regular troops. And I had a minigun on the aircraft, and they were shooting at us and we were shooting at them, and he was sitting in the back with an M60 machine gun, which he did fire on and off. But he was so taken by the event, I could tell his eyes were the size of saucers. But bless his heart, he was out there with us. As I recall, Citadel, either Citadel or VMI was his source of commission.
Okay.
But Rod was my wingman that day, and that's the day that poor old Rod was shot down several times in the same day in the same place.
Lord.
And every time he went down, we'd have to rescue him and take him back to base and get him another aircraft. But poor old Ken Stormer had to go through that with Rod routinely. But Stormer, one of the finest scout crew chiefs that ever lived. Stormer, Parker, Al Farrar, Red Hayes, these were all guys that were tremendous, not only crew chiefs of the aircraft, they had to maintain these things, but also flew with us in combat. And so their day was pretty dang full. You know, when we came back from a flight, they still had to maintain that aircraft, several hours of maintenance for each hour of flight time. So the crew chiefs of the Hueys and the scouts flew, and the crew chiefs of the Cobra did not. Of course, that requires 2 pilots. But that's a typical uniform that we wore in those days. That's the jungle fatigue. And Stu, of course, wore the traditional camouflage fatigues, which is what most of the ARPs wore most of the time.
What are the patches you guys are wearing?
The patch that's on the right side for me is this patch, the Outcast patch, the Scout Platoon patch, Low Level Hell.
Oh, okay.
And then the 4th Cavalry is on the left pocket of all the uniforms.
Okay.
That's the 4th Cavalry Regiment.
Excellent.
I want to talk just real quick about the Low Level Hell patch. When I first got to the Outcast, the Low Level Hell patch didn't exist. We were simply called the Outcasts, and it was a small blue rectangle with a skull on it, and it said Outcasts, and then below it said Aero Scout. In July of 1969, one of my pilots, Joe Vad, who was a former Marine, W1, came to me and said, "I've got a new design for a patch," and it was this patch, the Low Level Hell patch with the skull and cross sabers, and then the motto, Low Level Hell on the bottom. And we took that to the troop commander, and Charlie Moore, and Charlie liked it, and he said, "That's good. That can be your new patch." There it is, right there. This is actually my 3rd tour. This was. I did a tour in Cobras, and then I extended, and my unit was standing down. We can talk about that as we go along, but I got on the phone and I was in I Corps up in Phu Bai. You've talked to guys that lived in Phu Bai. That was a horrible place. But anyway, we were standing the unit down, and it was February of '72. And I got on the phone and got a hold of Rod Willis there, the other guy in the picture, and said, "Hey, I need to find a job. You guys got any vacancies?" And he put me on the phone to the troop commander, who said, "I need Cobras or Loaches." And I said, "Well, I fly both. What do you need?" And he said, "I need a scout platoon leader." He said, "My scout platoon leader got shot a week ago, and I need a scout platoon leader." And I said, "Well, I did it for 10 months as Dark Horse 1-6. I can do it another tour as Dark Horse 1-6. So I hopped a C-130 to Saigon, and then hopped an OH-6 from the unit that happened to be up at Saigon on a maintenance run. And that's how I got back to Dark Horse for the second tour, and then flew as Dark Horse 1-6 for another tour. A 1-6 is, to your principal audience, what a 1-0 is. A 1-0 is a platoon leader in a recon platoon. A 1-6 is a platoon leader of the first platoon. 2-6 is the platoon leader of the second platoon. 3-6 and 4-6 accordingly. 4-6 was always the ARP platoon leader, 3-6 the COBRA platoon leader, 2-6 the Huey platoon leader, and the 1-6 was the scout platoon leader. So that's how call signs worked. 6 was the troop commander, and so on.
Wow. Thank you for laying that out, because I'd heard and reading in your bio you were gracious to send. I was seeing code names and all of that. And like you said, in SOG parlance, I'm up to date, but aircraft terminology, I'm still a beginner
well,
here.
To anybody that's got the book, or when you get the book, I encourage you to read the glossary first. The Army loves its damn acronyms, and
Love
and
them.
it's so bad today. When I go back to a modern briefing or a discussion with present day soldiers, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. and the same in 1969. The glossary will help you understand the vernacular, if you will, of an Army aviator, and in many degrees a grunt in Vietnam. We never worked with SOG on my first tour. Never did. Did work with SOG elements on my second tour, and then CCS, Command and Control South, on my third tour in Cambodia. We did a lot of operations in Cambodia on my last tour. But in my first tour, we worked with, initially, January, February is about the time frame that the F Company of the 52nd Infantry Long Range Patrol changed to, I believe it was M Company 75th Rangers, with the 1st Division. This picture is a picture of me as a Huey pilot. That's my roommate, Barney Stevens, with his head turned away. That's Wayne McAdoo sitting in the back of the Huey looking backwards. He was the platoon leader of the Huey platoon. And then Warrant Officer Greg Oliver is there on the right. And this was during a downtime. Once we'd put the ARPs in, we'd go to a fire base somewhere and sit and wait in radio contact. That's a Prick 25 or Prick 77, whatever, there in the back. And we would maintain contact with the ARPs. And when they needed to be picked up, we'd fire it up and go get them again.
Well,
a lot of waiting in the clowns and the horsemen. A lot of sitting around.
Your first tour, you mentioned you're here. We see you're doing Huey work. And is this where you split between Huey and then getting into Loach immediately? Your first tour, or?
Yeah, this time frame is this is January or February of '69. It's more like February of '69, because I started flying Loaches the 1st of March, and so this would be February 1969. That's an H model Huey. All the Hueys in our unit when I got there were H models, so it's the most advanced version of the Huey that flew in Vietnam.
Oh wow! Two questions leading into your transition into the Loach. I know we'll have viewer questions. I've got some great ones coming in. But where when you guys would and I'm not even sure where your home base would have been, but when y'all launch and, as you said, put the guys in and y'all are sitting and waiting, what fire bases are y'all at? Are y'all up in I Corps waiting, or what?
No, this is everything in 69. Everything in low-level hell occurs in 3 Corps.
3 Corps.
Our home base was Milloy Army Airfield, which was located north of Long Binh and Saigon. We were due east of Cu Chi, and between Cu Chi, which was home of the 3rd of the 4th Cav, we were 1st of the 4th Cav with the 1st Division. They were with the 25th Division. Between those two bases was a place called the Iron Triangle.
Yes.
Huge area, full of bad guys, terrible area. And we worked in the 1st Infantry Division's tactical area of operations. When you get the book, you'll see there's a map at the front that shows those places, fire bases, terrain features, the onion stem, the testicles, wonderful places with wonderful names.
Great names.
The mushroom. But we would go to a fire base. Every unit within the 1st Division, 1st of the 16th, 1st of the 28th, 2nd of the 2nd Mech, they all had fire bases that they worked out of. And then there were night defensive positions where elements of those battalions would remain overnight. So whatever the closest fire base, semi-secure area, to the place that we dropped the ARPS off is where the Hueys would land. There were always 4. There were 7 guys per Huey and 4 Hueys. And we'd land at that fire base and just sit and wait, eat sea rations and lay around getting suntans. The life of a Huey pilot in an air cav troop went from absolute boredom, which is that picture you just saw, to stark raving terror when you hit a hot landing zone. I remember coming out of one landing zone. We had just picked the ARPS up. It was, again, in February, about the same time, still flying with Bob Holmes because I was smart enough to do that. As we're coming out of the landing zone, having just picked up the ARPS, Bob gave the flight the permission to suppress both sides of the landing zone. And so you have the door gunner shooting, and you also have the ARPS that are sitting in the door. There's no seats in the airplane. They're sitting in the door. And those guys start shooting. And as we take off out of the landing zone and just start to turn left, all of a sudden I'm hit in the neck. And I'm telling Bob, take the aircraft, because I was flying it. And I reach up with my hand behind me and I'm looking for blood because I know I'm shot. It hurts like the devil. And what had happened is one of the machine gunners from the ARPS was sitting in the left door, and he was shooting out the door, and his hot brass came over the back of my seat and went down the neck of my flight suit. So I had 2 pieces of hot brass. They burned a welt the size of a 1/4-inch rope. I was convinced I was shot and killed. But in the future, I told them, don't shoot that damn M60 out the back door when I'm flying, because hot brass hurts.
Yeah, that's the last thing you need is being rained with hot brass trying to get out of a hot LZ, just jerking and trying not to. Oh, Lord have mercy. I can't imagine how loud it must have been pulling out of that LZ like that as well.
Actually, with a flight helmet, we wore the SPH-4 sound attenuating flight helmets in the Hueys. I didn't like those in Scouts because they were too good. And so generally in Scouts, I wore an APH-5, which it's supposed to be an armor protective helmet. It wasn't armored at all. It was fiberglass. But it had less sound attenuation, which meant I could hear ground fire better. Now that's an SPH-4. That is my 3rd tour. That's the famous war helmet, which was painted by a first lieutenant named Ron Dibella. when I was flying Cobras. That's where that hat started from.
Oh,
and then when I went back to flying Loaches, I just kept it.
Wow. And it's as we said, we've and guys, I'll start throwing some of y'all's questions in now, since we're transitioning into what some of y'all's questions deal with. You know what you mentioned in one of your other interviews, you know, the basis of all Army flying pretty much is the Huey, and that's what Vietnam is really known as. It's the workhorse of the Vietnam War. What was your transitional period? Was it difficult? Well, what are the differences going from a Huey into the Loach and doing the type of flying that you're now going to be doing in that bird?
It's like going from a 1-ton pickup truck to an MGA. That's the difference. The Huey is an all-purpose. It's a big aircraft. You know, the L11 to L13 engines, a lot of horsepower, big airplane, big blades, carry 8 or 10 people. Maneuverable in its own right, but not a ballerina. The OH-6 is just the opposite. It is incredibly maneuverable. 4 blades versus 2. A faster rotor system, a semi-rigid rotor system versus a teetering rotor system. Smaller motor by far than the Huey. The OH-6 had a 317 shaft horsepower motor, derated to 272 by the transmission. So not nearly as powerful a motor, but much smaller aircraft, much lighter aircraft. And I've always said you could turn on a dime and give them 9 cents change. The OH-6 was incredibly maneuverable. I flew them. I've flown them most of my life. After I retired from the Army after 26 years, I flew OH-6s with the Kansas City Police Department.
Oh.
That came from law enforcement support office to the police. So I've flown them for many thousands of hours, and I love the aircraft. In fact, I want to be buried in one. The actual 340, which is the aircraft you showed in the previous picture, hangs from the ceiling of the Army Aviation Museum at Novosel. That's the actual 17340. It got there not because of me initially. There it is. It got there because it was Silver Eagle number 2. The aircraft in late '72 was shot down. I had already left country. I gave the aircraft to my friend Drew Sheely, who was the first lieutenant, and he was flying the bird and got shot down. Hurt him, hurt the bird. Bird went to Culver City to be rebuilt by Hughes Tool Company, and when it was reissued to the Army, the war was over. So they sent the aircraft to Rucker, where it became Silver Eagle number 2 for the Army Precision Aviation Demonstration Team. That team only existed till 1975. The fuel crunch killed the demonstration team. The Army could only do one, the Golden Knights or the Silver Eagles. They chose the Golden Knights. Probably the right choice, I think, even from my perspective. But it was kept in the storage facility at the Aviation Museum in Silver Eagle markings. And then when Low Level Hell was published in 1992, Steve Maxim, who was the director of the museum in those days, got a hold of me and said, "Do you have pictures of this aircraft from its Vietnam War paint?" And I said, "I sure do." And I sent him all that, and they were able to reconfigure the aircraft in the markings that I last flew it in with Dark Horse in 1972. And that's where she sits today. So
I've been there as of last week. I got to see her, and you told me when we first spoke that I saw a Loach, and you were like, "That's my bird." I was like, "Holy cow, I just saw it."
Yep, that's her. I keep lobbying the Army to, when I get cremated, let me just sit me up there in the front seat. Let me hang up there with her. But so far, I'm not getting a positive response.
Hey, I mean, especially if you're cremated, I mean, they could put you in one of the little the ammo pouches, or put you back there where nobody'd even see it. I mean, you could just be one with the aircraft then.
You betcha. You
I mean,
betcha. Well, that's probably a pipe dream, but
can't hurt asking.
the fun thing is that she's going to exist far longer than the guys that flew her. We've already lost her crew chief, Jim Christie, who was my crew chief in '72. Jimmy was a COBRA crew chief who volunteered to fly scouts. Sistersville, West Virginia, wonderful kid. Um, Absolutely fearless. Loved flying scouts, loved flying with me, and I had a tendency to draw fire, and we lost him several years ago to a blood disorder. And when I go, the only thing left is 340, and I'm feeling good about that.
Did you just mention Jimmy? What was his name? Is this
Parker?
Oh no, Jimmy Parker. I was getting mixed up with a different Jimmy that'll end up coming later. That's a great story.
Yeah, the problem in my history, there's a lot of Jimmys.
I was about to say, I just noticed there are quite a few Jimmys popping up here.
Jimmy Parker was my principal crew chief in 1969. Calhoun, Georgia, still with us. Wonderful guy, heavily featured in low-level hell. Jimmy Christie was my crew chief in 1972. We've lost him now. We lost Monty Garfield, one of our crew chiefs. These guys have had a lot of issues with cancer, I think largely related to the exposure to Agent Orange. What guys don't realize until they do some of the background is every airfield in Vietnam was defoliated with either Agent Orange or Agent Purple. Mm-hmm. And so the pentaprime, the black asphalt oil mixture that was our landing area, upon which we had pressed steel or perforated steel plank, PSP, was heavily infected with carcinogenative material, mm-hmm. Which has been linked to Agent Orange exposure. But you didn't have to be in the jungle. No. They stood on it all day in the flight line, and
it's nasty.
It's the reality of the situation that we have to deal with. So I've lost crew chiefs largely from cancer, or they have been affected by cancer from both tours, 69 and 72.
It seems like the majority of the, not to sound denigrative or any sort, but any of the guys that were in some shape, form, or fashion in the proverbial punch bowl and actually in combat in some shape, form, or fashion came across it, either a direct hit. My dad was rained on several times. We've saw guys coming across it in the field and not knowing at that time early on how poisonous it was. So, I mean, it was just a plague that popped up on everybody, like you said, not just the men on the ground, especially the guys around the air bases being affected.
The Iron Triangle was heavily defoliated. All of the rivers and byways in South Vietnam were heavily defoliated to reduce the cover for sampans. My third tour, flying out of Can Tho in the Delta, we worked largely in the U Minh forest, an entire area of Vietnam that was defoliated. In '69, we would actually fly cover missions under either Huey or C-123 spray aircraft with the OH-6 and the COBRA covering those guys. And I've come back with Agent Orange spray on the aircraft, and the crew chiefs have to clean that off. And I don't doubt that there's a connection at all. It was just too many of them, greater than the national average for the exposure to either testicular cancer or
pancreatic is popping.
Pancreatic, lung cancer, bladder cancer. We've lost a lot of these crew chiefs to that, and we're starting to lose the pilots too. I've lost two in the last year. Danny Lasner, who flew with me in 1972, call sign Baby Son, looked like he was about 12 years old. And then Tim Kohlberg, we just lost 3 weeks ago to cancer. Started with prostate and got worse and metastasized throughout the body. So we've lost 2 Dark Horse Scouts in the last little bit.
Jeez, I really hate to hear that. We're losing you guys weekly, and especially in the SF community. They run the taps, and it's literally daily, at least one, maybe up to multiple. So that's why we're so glad you guys are open to coming on and sharing with us, because if y'all don't share and talk as much as y'all can or willing to, folks won't know y'all's history, the correct history, straight from the veteran's mouth. So it's that's why we thank y'all so much for doing stuff like this.
Well, it's actually a pleasure to do so. The media didn't want to fly with us. You don't see a lot of films or media work done from an OH-6. I had one guy one time in '69, CBS News sent a photographer to fly a scout mission with me, and he lasted about 20 minutes and said, "Take me the heck home." The only thing he did in that mission is he took a still photo of me flying off the left wing of the Cobra, and that wound up in the division's yearbook. But the minute I went low level, and he didn't like that at all. We weren't any higher than a Volkswagen, and he was not comfortable with that. So we had to take that guy home.
I mean, I can kind of see being that low level, thinking he might be getting a regular Huey flight, but no, not in this, sir. And as a matter of fact, we've got some great OH-6 questions here leading up, and several things you just mentioned we'll bring up here later that are I think people are going to be interested in, that I don't think we'll give up too much away from the book, so people can read it before you next appear. But Daniel was curious. Could you describe what your typical mission profile while flying the OH-6 Loach was?
We had 2 kinds of missions each day. We had a VR mission, a visual recon mission. We had 2 of those that would take off each day at before first light, right about first light, and that was a hunter-killer team, 1 Loach and 1 Cobra, each given an area of responsibility through our normal chain, which was the Division G2, or intelligence staff. We didn't get missions from the 1st Aviation Battalion. We were part of the 1st Aviation Battalion through a relationship called attachment, simply for logistical purposes. We were detached from the quarter cav, the armored cavalry squadron, 3 troops of armored cav, because they really couldn't support us logistically in country. We had JP4, they had MOGAS and diesel. So we got our missions from G2. They would give us a box, and we would go out in the morning with these 2 VR teams and work them all day in particular areas to recover reconnaissance information that the division wanted. The scout would fly low level and talk about what he would see. Trails, traffic, recency, how recent the foot traffic was, overhead cover, base camps, fortifications, and so on. And everything that I said on UHF, and the Cobra talked to me on VHF. So at no time would the Cobra ever step on me in terms of radio transmissions. Things would go to hell in a handbasket real quick when you started taking ground fire. So UHF was mine, VHF was his, and we could hear each other because you got 2 radios. The front seat of the Cobra had a map and was following us on the map. The back seat of the Cobra was watching us like a hawk and never took his eyes off of us. And the front seat would mark down grid coordinates of where we reported traffic and trails and base areas, occupied, unoccupied, ground fire, and all that sort of thing. So that was one profile. That was the visual recon or VR teams that went out every day. The second profile was the scramble team, also hunter-killer, 1 Cobra, 1 Loach, and we were on strip alert for the information where a VR team got itself into a fight. The scramble team would scramble up and relieve them on station, let them go rearm and refuel and cycle back in. So scramble missions, you got up, did all your pre-flight, ate breakfast, and then you sat in the hooch waiting to go. All your gear's in the aircraft, and the crew chiefs got it all ready to go. And we'd just sit around watching Armed Forces Vietnam television. We had one channel. The interesting, if you've never seen Good Morning Vietnam, it was very much like that, the Robin Williams movie. But there were no ads on Armed Forces Vietnam television. It was all public service ads. You'd have Ruta Lee, the actress, would walk out of a huge mailbox and talk about how to send a letter to the States duty free and all that sort of thing. And you'd go from a wonderful hour of Gunsmoke into a horrible hour of the Lawrence Welk show. Some of that stuff you just couldn't tolerate. But
what a switch.
But those were the two missions. And then, of course, when the VR team would find something that we needed to exploit, that would fire up the Hueys. The ARPs, who had all their gear already on their respective aircraft, would run out, get on their Hueys, launch forward into the battle zone, be put on the ground, and then the aero scouts would take up a position directly on top of them, flying directly above the ARPs to protect them as they moved forward. We could actually see better from a vertical position than many times they could. You know, the jungle in Vietnam, even after being roam plowed, is pretty darn thick and grows back very, very quickly. So once the ARPs were on the ground, we talked to them directly. We had also an FM radio in the aircraft, and we would talk to their RTOs in each of the squads or the platoon leader to protect those guys as they did whatever was done on the ground. And then, of course, if people got in trouble, we had the Cobras above us to bring the heavy firepower, 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rockets, 20 millimeter after about 1970, the Vulcan system on the Cobra, and then minigun and chunker in the nose.
Wow, man, oh man. And we've got some great viewer questions, but I wanted to see if this was actually one of your tours with the Cobras.
Nope, that's scout.
Nope. Dang it.
That's me at 20 as a scout platoon leader. That good-looking fella on the side of me there is Dean Shiner. Captain Dean Shiner was one of my principal Cobra guys.
Okay, I saw his Cobra patch, and I just thought maybe this is an entire Cobra group here with you being Cobra already. But
no, there's two things about that picture. That's actually taken in flight operations. That's what I wore a lot of the time. I wore jungle fatigues, and that's my Car 15 over my shoulder, and my shoulder holster with my little pistol, which was a 38 caliber pistol. And then I also had a bigger pistol, a 45.
Very nice.
But Dean there, that lanyard around his neck secures a thing called the SOI, the Signal Operating Instructions, the code book, if you will. Scouts didn't carry them. Cobras did.
Oh.
And he had all the codes and the unit call signs and all that stuff that were current. They changed those things periodically. But that was roughly probably April, May 1969 time frame. That's when I was in my let's grow a mustache to look like we're 20. It didn't help very much, but I did have wonderful jet black hair in those days, and somewhere that got away.
That's a great photo of you guys, and I think the mustache was working for you. I think the Vietnam facial hair was epic. The mustaches between the SF guys, the aviators, and their curly cues like Robin Olds, or Mike Force guys out in the bush for 30 days that come back looking like, the Green Berets of today in Afghanistan with their mountain beards.
Yeah, our Cobra platoon leader in '69 was a guy named Bill Church, Captain Bill Church, and he had the little curly Q mustache. And I never cared that much about putting wax on my lip.
You have to keep I mean, it's a lot of upkeep for that bad boy.
I just wanted a plain old mustache so I didn't look so dadgum young. Wish I did today.
I can't grow one. I'm trying to, but this is about as far as it goes right now. So until I can, I won't be pulling a Walter Shoemate and having a big, awesome mustache. You had mentioned, and we always get this, especially, well, with all helicopter pilots, but especially the Cobras or the Loaches who might, shall we say, be more risk averse as far as if they were to hit the ground, they're not trying to, but maybe having something to run and gun with. What were you carrying what were you carrying throughout all of your helicopter models as far as weapons in case you were shot down?
When I first got to Vietnam, I went down to the unit armory to draw all of my gear. And this picture is actually a Cobra tour picture. That's 1971 into 72.
Wow.
But I first drew a 38 caliber pistol, and the first one they gave me, I believe, was a Colt Police Positive.
Wow.
I didn't like it. It was a tiny little thing. I didn't think that was very respectable. So I asked them for a 45, and I've always preferred a 45. So I had the 45, and later on I got a Smith & Wesson Model 10 4-inch, which I would carry. But in this particular picture, I've always carried a Car 15, XM 177E2, I think they called it. They fit in a Loach, they fit in a Cobra. The M16 was a little big for the front seat of a Loach, or to put in a Cobra. Car 15s actually worked pretty well.
That collapsible stock.
In this particular film or picture, I'm wearing the standard Nomex flight suit. The boots are my tanker boots, my armored cav tanker boots. That's a standard aviator survival vest that I've got on with my little happy face button on it. And I don't know where I got that. In Vietnam, somebody gave me that. And then a standard cav hat, which we wore with the 5th Cav, 3rd of the 5th Cav Delta Troop. Call sign was Charlie Horse. There's an interesting story about how a unit with a Delta nomenclature becomes a Charlie Horse call sign. But we wore the Cav hat, and then we also wore either a white scarf or a black bandana with our call sign embroidered on it. But essentially, when 3rd of the 17th Cav came north for Lamson 719, also up there was D Troop 3rd of the 5th Cav, call sign War Wagon, Crusader, and so on. And at the end of Lamson 719, the 5th Cav Brigade, 5th Mech, rotated out of Vietnam, and they took 3rd of the 5th elements with them. So essentially 3rd of the 17th and 3rd of the 5th just changed guidons. One day they were Charlie Horse 3rd of the 17th. The next day they were Charlie Horse D Troop 3rd of the 5th. Same people, same aircraft, same unit markings. They just changed the designator. The aircraft troops often did that. When the 1st Infantry Division went home in March of 1970 through the Vietnamization process, the Air Cav Troop that I was in, D Troop 1st of the 4th, did not make the journey home. They were kept in country because of the value of an Air Cav Troop. We moved to Soc Trang in the Delta and simply rebadged as C Troop 16th Cavalry.
Wow.
Different name, but the same call sign, Dark Horse, the same people. First at Soc Trang, and then they moved off down to Canto, and they were at Canto when I rejoined them in February of 72.
Wow. It's amazing. It's the stuff you saw, the time periods you're going through, because we get one guy that's does his year service, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But I mean, between the aircraft, the length of time you're in, the units you're supporting, I mean, it's I'm so anxious to get low level hell. I'm telling you. We've got a few more.
My return to Vietnam was circumstantial. When I left Vietnam the first time, after low level hell concludes, I was supposed to go to Fort Rucker to be a flight instructor. And I saw that professionally as the kiss of death for a commissioned officer. And so I wrote Armor Branch. Major Beau Bergeron was the assignment officer. And I wrote him a note in about November of 69 and said, I don't really want to go to Fort Rucker and be a flight instructor. I'm an armor officer. I've done a year in the air. I'd like to go to Germany, and I'd like to have an opportunity to command on the ground. You have to remember that aviators of my period were not aviation branch, because aviation branch didn't exist until 1983.
Wow.
And so we were armor officers first who happened to be aviators. And your branch had a lot to do with what type of aviation you got assigned to. The Air Cav was primarily armor and infantry officers. So I got a note back from Major Bergeron, and he said, okay, we're going to change your orders. I don't have time to give you a unit, but I'm sure you'll be able to maneuver that when you get to Germany. So I came home, spent 30 days leave, and then blasted off to Germany, having proposed while I was there to my high school girlfriend and junior high. I'd known her many, many years, Margaret. And when June rolled around, I was commanding a tank company, B Company 264 Armor at Kahn Barracks in Schweinfurt. And I went home, we got married, brought her back to Germany. And then in October, some medical issues cropped up. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And so the Army sent me very quickly to Fort Sam Houston, the medical post, in October of 70. And then she died from that affliction in February of 71. So here I am, an aviator at Fort Sam Houston. I was assigned to the 4th Recruiting District just to get me there. They had a headquarters at Fort Sam, and I'm like a fish out of water. So I called Armor Branch and said, hey, let me go back to Vietnam. So Armor Branch, who was very, very helpful during that period for me, said, that's fine. Would you like a school? And I said, yeah, how about Cobra school? So they sent me a set of orders, sent me to Hunter Army Airfield at Savannah, Georgia. And I go rolling in there about June of 1971. And I walk into the Cobra Hall for the Cobra transition, and there's 3 other guys in the room. There's 2 warrant officers, Bob Hartley and Ken Shriver, and there's another captain named Larry Massman. And after a little bit, the instructor pilot takes us out on the flight line. They got a Cobra unbuttoned, and they're asking them, what's this? What's this? And these guys are rattling off. That's the intervalometers. That's the igniter, exciter. That's the 42-degree gearbox. Captain Mills, what's this? I have no idea what that is. It looks like a vent. He'd say, well, no, it's actually an inlet. And he looks at me quizzically, and he says, how many hours you got in a Cobra? I said, I don't have any hours in a Cobra. I'm a Loach pilot. And he just looks at me for a second, and he said, well, you're in the Cobra instructor pilot's course. The Army had sent me to the instructor pilot's course for an aircraft I was not qualified in.
Oh, Lord.
Much gnashing of teeth over that. There was not a transition class in force at that time. They were actually standing down in Vietnam. And they figured out I was a standardization instructor pilot, or SIP, in the OH-6. And I didn't have a problem with methods of instruction, MOI. I just didn't know how to fly the airplane. So come to find out, all 3 of those other guys were coming back into the Army after a break in service. 2 of them were former instructor pilots, Bob Hartley and Ken Shriver. And so what I had to do is I had to go through the transition and then go through MOI while they were going through gunnery. And then I went through gunnery, just me. One airplane, one instructor pilot out to the range. They had already graduated the week before. So in August of 71, I graduated as an instructor pilot in the COBRA with about 42 hours in the aircraft, which is unheard of. And off I go to Vietnam. And when I reported into Delta 3rd of the 5th, my unit instructor pilot was a crusty warrant officer, wonderful guy named McDade Cockrell. And Mac looked at my flight record. And he said, "You're an instructor pilot in the COBRA?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got 42 hours in the aircraft." He said, "That's not possible." And of course, I told him the story. Later on, when one of the other instructors in the unit got sent back to the state, the troop, I was the assistant platoon leader of the gun platoon. And I got sent back to the division to take an SIP check ride, one who can make IPs from the 101st Airborne Division to whom we were attached. And the guy that gave me that check ride was Bob Hartley, who was one of the students in my instructor pilot school. Bob was an immensely qualified COBRA pilot and instructor who had had a branch of or a break-in service. But I became an SIP with 125 or so hours in the aircraft. And the fellows used to go out to the flight line at Quang Tri and set up lounge chairs. I'm in the front seat of a COBRA doing a check ride, auto rotation. And they would sit out there with pieces of cardboard with numbers on it and rate my auto rotations, which they thought was hilarious. I didn't think all that much of it, but we flew out of Quang Tri until about December or so of 1971, and then we moved to Camp Evans. Were there a month or so, and then moved to Hue Phu Bai, and then stood down there in February of 72, and that's how I got a hold of Dark Horse and went back to them. They actually told me I could go home because I was a second tour aviator, and I told the troop commander at the time, a fellow named Joe Seary, I said, "Sir, this is how I got here, and I don't really want to go back home right now." And he said, "Well, go find a job." And that's how I got back to Dark Horse. I didn't have a set of orders. I went from Hue Phu Bai to Canto in the Delta and just walked in and said, "Here I am." They knew I was coming, but I didn't have any orders. I had to go over to the 164th Aviation Group and explain my presence when they were looking for me to send me home. And I said, "No, here I am in 4 Corps, and I'm going to stay here for a while." And it all worked out great. I had a great time. Second tour is the Dark Horse 1-6.
Holy cow. Wow. When and we've got more questions, and we'll be going a little bit over here because we've got a 2-hour date we'll hold to, and guys, we're already got a part 2, so do not worry. We'll have that set up later on. But is it not long after you get back in country with the company of the 5th Cav that you end up rescuing? Do you lead a massive force to rescue a downed Huey and a downed OH-6?
31 December 1971, New Year's Eve. We were the 2nd of the 17th was the large air cavalry squadron of the 101st Airborne Division. Those guys were standing down. We were still flying air cavalry raids into the Ashau Valley, arguably the most dangerous place I ever flew. Heavy anti-aircraft, heavy enemy presence on the ground. Medals of honor came out of that place, Bernie Fisher and Ashau and all that sort of thing. But on 31 December, one of our heavy cav teams, and it was 2 Cobras, 1 Loach, and a Huey. By 1971-72, we weren't putting the ARPs on the ground anymore. The ARPs were flying in the back of the Hueys with 3 or 4 guys rigged up as a rescue team in case the Loach or a Cobra went down. The Huey would go down, drop ropes, drop the ARPs on board, grab everybody, hook them up, and sling them out on the end of a rope. So we had a team that was headed out to the Ashow, and there was very, very low cloud cover, about 800 feet. And the Huey happened to stray dangerously close over some high terrain, and there was a 14.5 set up. Interestingly, if we have time, or maybe next time, I'll tell you the name of the guy that was on that 14.5 gun, the North Vietnamese soldier. Long story, great fun. Got to meet those guys on a trip to Vietnam in 15. But anyway, the 14.5 guy lights up the Huey, hits the gunner in the head. He's out of the fight. The aircraft does a forced landing into the jungle. Lee Denmark, the crew chief on the left side, dismounts his Huey, goes about 15 feet, and an NVA soldier stands up and shoots him dead. You got Noel Harvey was the aircraft commander, and Neil Flynn was the co-pilot. So you got 3 or 4 ARPs, 3 I believe it was, and a gunner that's badly injured, although not killed. Now I got a crew chief who has been killed. And so the Loach comes in from that team and tries to drop them ammo, and the Loach gunner is shot and killed, and the aircraft damaged. So the Loach veers over to Quezon, which is abandoned at this point in time, and does a controlled crash near the old bunker line. And so now we got 2 aircraft down. Cobras can't do anything to rescue anybody. So I responded out with the rest of the gun platoon. I think it was 6 or 8 Cobras and a couple of Hueys. And that thing turned into a major cluster.
6 hours.
Ultimately, that the 37th Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Group, HH-53s protected by Sandy A1H Sky Raiders, came out, prepped the area, a lot of suppression. The low bird, they always came in 2s, the 53s. The low bird went in to make a rescue, got to a hover, and just got the P-Wadden shot out of them at a hover. He barely got off the hover and headed over toward Quang Tri with the high bird covering him. So we've had the first rescue attempt to get them out of there was a failure because of ground fire. So I'm still up there, and I've got the Sandys who stayed with me, and we had a Covey FAC and an OV-10, and he was bringing in Vietnamese jets and U.S. aircraft, and we got these guys circled, pretty good in terms of firepower. And after a bit, we bring in a second pair of Jollies who came out of Da Nang, and ultimately on that particular attempt, we were able to get everybody out, both the dead and the wounded. That was 31 December. We had an identical event on the 25th of January. Charlie Horse 25 was the Huey on a heavy cav team that was going back to Quang Tri. I was one of the 4 Cobras that was in that group, and we were going back to Quang Tri at the end of the day when we got word that an Air Force fast FAC, an F4, call sign was Stormy 05, had been shot down in Laos. And so we were scrambled to go across the border and get those guys. Both the pilot and the guy in the back punched out. They were okay, but they were about a mile apart. And unbeknownst to any of us, at the time that aircraft went down, there was a UH-1 at Camp Eagle, 101st Airborne Division maintenance officer with a lieutenant in the aircraft with him. They were doing a maintenance test flight of a Huey. He hears the call on guard, and so he launches himself into Laos by himself. They had two 38 caliber pistols and a can of orange pop. That's all they had on the aircraft. And Kirchbaum was the guy's name. We didn't even know he was there. And so we rearm, refuel. We're headed for Laos. And this guy shows up by himself. He finds the FAC, talks him into the first guy. And then he has to hover down a road to get the second guy, picks him up and heads back to Camp Eagle with these two Air Force pilots. So we're on the way. We just had passed Quezon, and we got the word from Air Force that both guys had been rescued. So we turned around. It's now pitch black. We turned around and we're headed back down the Belong River Valley toward Quang Tree or Evans. I don't remember which one, but all of a sudden these tracers start zipping up and they hit Charlie Horse 2-5, and he actually starts on fire. Bill Allen was the aircraft commander, and the aircraft starts on fire, and as they're descending, the fire begins to reach toward the cockpit. The gunner on the right-hand side actually climbs out on the skid of the Huey, and he's standing holding onto the door of the pilot of the Huey because of the fire. The fire in the back is consuming the crew. And at about 100 feet, the gunner can't take it anymore, so he just lets go, and he descends into the darkness. The aircraft lands in the Belong River. It kind of rolls over. The crew chief of that aircraft is injured. His leg ultimately is amputated. The pilot and co-pilot are both burned in the Huey, but not terribly. Burning is horrible. However, it happens. They were not
life threatening at least. Yeah.
The gunner on the right side of the aircraft went with the aircraft. He was consumed with the aircraft, and then the ARPs were all badly burned. Two of the ARPs that were on the ground on the mission that I ran in December, the Charlie Horse 2-6 rescue, the sergeant who was on the ground and one of his ARPs, a former 75th Ranger guy, were both burned. Sergeant Figueroa and another fellow were burned, and ultimately both of them passed a day or two later. And then two of the guys were consumed in the fire and were not recovered. Years later, in 2015, when I went back to the scene of that crash with 17 members of the 241st Anti-Aircraft Regiment of the North Vietnamese Army, I talked to those guys on camera with a documentary crew about the death of the guys on that Huey, and the gunner on the right side of the Huey was African American, and they all said the guy they found the next day was an African American. They thought he was a pilot because he was wearing Nomex, but they buried his body along the bank of the Belong River. That river has now been dammed, and it's a lake. So the chances of finding that soldier, he has not been positively identified, but he was KIA. So that was the second mission. And then on the 30th of January, I went down producing that picture that you've seen of me getting hoisted into.
If you don't mind.
Used by Jolly Green in the course of 30 days.
Could we're here at about an hour 20, and we've got several great stories, and I think what we're gonna do is combined with me being able to read and better have questions and stuff. I'm gonna pin these stories for part 2 because they're gonna be really great, covering all 3 of your aircraft that you fly in. But I think because we've got this photo that you just mentioned, and it is arguably it is arguably one of the most famous photos during the Vietnam War. Could you cover that as our last story before we do our Q&A for the day?
Yeah.
Because it is an outstanding story and photograph.
Yeah, I was flying. I was the aircraft commander of a heavy hunter killer team on 30 January of 1972, and we were working an area called the Rung Rung Valley, kind of south and west of the Ashau and Khe Sanh. And an Air Force FAC Covey 295 came up on the radio and said, any aircraft vicinity, Khe Sanh, your radio. And he was on guard, the universal frequency. And so I popped up on the radio. I said, this is Charlie Horse 38, which was my call sign. And what you need? And he said, well, I got an anti-aircraft gun shooting at fast movers up here, and they're going off station, and I need some suppression. If you could, are you a gunship? I said, yeah, we're a 2 gunship team with a Huey and a Loach. And I had a 20 ship, a M35 Gatling gun on the left wing of Cobra, which was just wonderful. I love the 20. It was a pinpoint suppression, 20 millimeter high explosive, wonderful gun. I really liked that. And so I brought the scout up to altitude, and I said, you get on the wing of the Huey. And my wingman was Bob Smith, First Lieutenant Bob Smith, and his front seat was First Lieutenant Lewis K. Brewer, the 4th, Texas Tech All-American, and call sign Animal. Lou was a typical NFL physique, who one day was getting, that's a perfect picture. One day he was climbing into the front seat of the Cobra, and he reached up and grabbed the strut that holds that front door open, and he broke the whole front door off the aircraft. So we started calling him Animal. But I brought the aircraft up to altitude. We were up about 5,000 feet, and we headed off to find Covey 295. And very quickly, we saw what he was talking about. We knew where the gun was. And so I told Bob Smith, my wingman, I said, I'm going to go in and make an initial dive on this guy, and I'm going to shoot 20 on the gun pit, and then I'm going to nail him with a flechette rocket out of the right inboard pod. And so I did that. I did a wing over and zeroed in on the gun pit, and I'm lighting him up with 20 millimeter. It's little sparkles going all over the gun pit, and that's 20 millimeter high explosive incendiary. And I'm in about an 80-degree dive, and I'm punching up around 170 knots. And I switched my fire control to inboard, which identified the pod on the right side. And it had flechette rockets in it. And I fired one flechette rocket, which burst over the gun pit, little puff of red smoke, you can't miss it. And I fired a second flechette rocket just before I started to pull out. And all of a sudden, the world just went to hell. The second rocket ignited in the pod, but did not leave the pod.
Oh.
So now I got a rocket assist on the right wing and nothing on the left wing to counteract it. So the aircraft turns violently to the left, and that burning rocket motor set off the rocket motors, the other 5 that were in the pod, a 7-shot pod. And that pod exploded, went through the tail rotor, and took off my tail rotor, my 90-degree gearbox, my 42, my 60, and all of that left the aircraft, and it took the tail with it. So everything aft of the exhaust on the Cobra left the aircraft, and the shift in center of gravity was significant. And I'm angled down like that, trying to keep the aircraft from rolling over on its back. I got the stick full in my stomach, and the rotor system is going to the left, and my aircraft is rotating to the right because I got no tail rotor anymore. And the rotation is so violent that I can't really see the horizon. I'm in a bowl with mountains all around me, and all I could see was a spinning green. And Lou Brewer in the front seat of Bob Smith's Cobra keys the radio and says, "Pull it, damn it, pull it." And my mother used to always preface most things she said to me by "damn it, Hugh." So I knew that they were talking to me. And I pulled my collective in the back seat, and the rotation stopped momentarily. Then it started the other way. We hit the trees, rolled over, and went in. I woke up minutes later. I don't know how long, but minutes later, I woke up to the smell of JP4 and an incredible pain in my left leg. And I reached up in front of me, and I reached out, and my boot was up against my face. And the aircraft was upside down, and I released my quick release on the shoulder harness, and I fell through the shattered canopy. I had a fractured leg. My front seater was a young warrant officer named John Bryant, and immediately John was in significant pain, broken neck, broken back. And so here I am on the side of a mountain by myself. I'm all messed up. Today they call it the traumatic brain injury. It's certainly that. I had a significant concussion. And the Loach all of a sudden came to a hover over the top of me, and the crew chief was a kid named Rip Smith, General Jimmy Smith's son, later commander of 1st Cavalry Division. And Rip took out his survival radio and he held it up, and I'm looking at it, and then it occurs to me, oh yeah, he wants me to get out on my radio and talk to him. So I did that, and I said, you know, Bryant's trapped in the airplane and I'm messed up. I need some help down here. So in the rear, we had a bunch of ARPs in the rear. The aircraft with me did not have ropes sufficient to go 150 plus feet through the triple canopy jungle where I had chosen to crash. There's always a rule of thumb in the military that you don't want to crash on the target you were just shooting at, and I had just done that. I'd crashed very close to that gun. And so they had to call back to the rear, got another Huey with longer ropes, 250-foot ropes, and they had 3 ARPs, one of whom was a medic, and this kid had never rappelled before. He was brand new in the unit, had not even been trained on rappelling yet. And he comes to a hover over the top of where we are, and in come these 2 ARPs who are veterans and this medic, and he just carabiners into the rope, and he's supposed to control it, you know, in a typical rappelling with your brake hand, and he just throws both hands up and steps off the skid of the Huey, no brake whatsoever, right through the top of a tree. He's the first guy on the ground, and that kid was the first person to us. They couldn't get Bryant out of the aircraft, and so the Jolly Greens were again called. I by that time had 4 or 5 Cobras over the top of me for cover. So I had 2 ARPs and a medic who were protecting us. I was out of the aircraft. Bryant was not. And then all of a sudden, here comes the Jolly Greens again with the Sky Raiders. And when I'd come out of the aircraft, the first thing I did was take my helmet off and put it on the ground. I reached behind my seat on the Cobra and I put on my Cav hat. And so I don't know why I did that, but I've got my Car 15 and I'm wearing my Cav hat. And here comes the Sky Raiders. And the first thing they did was prep the area around us. They put in a lot of ordnance. And if you've never been on the ground when they circled you, it's terrifying. 20 millimeter, cluster bomb. And finally, they drop a Mark 47 smoke bomb, which is dudded. It's defused in the dud position, as I understand it, so that when the case of that thing cracks, it emits a smoke cloud that's persistent rather than an explosion. And so they did that, which was a smoke screen to protect the Jolly Green. And after a bit, in comes the Jolly Green, comes to a hover, out comes the hoist, and down the hoist comes Harvey Picklesheimer, Sergeant Pararescueman, and he's my rescue guy. And he comes down, and his first concern was to get Bryant out of the aircraft, and he had some tools. And I remember the most memorable thing I remember. I looked at this guy as he's coming down. He's wearing camouflage uniform. He's carrying a Smith & Wesson Model 39 blue steel with walnut grips, and I thought, that's a cool pistol. But anyway, that's what you remember on a time like that. But he works on getting John out of the aircraft. He does so, puts John into the litter, hoists John up, and then he says, "Okay, Captain, this is you're going up next." So it occurred to me that my KY-28, my code box, was still in the aircraft, and the control head is in the cockpit where I'd been sitting. So I pulled my 45 out, and I'm going to shoot the control box of my KY-28 to disable it. It's our identification, friend and foe, and all that stuff. And it didn't occur to me in my debilitated state that there was JP4 all over the place because the fuel cell of the aircraft had exited the side of the aircraft. And I'm going to shoot a hole in the cockpit and blow us all up. So that he says, no, don't do that. And he takes my 45 away from me. And I said, I got to have this. And I reached back in there with my survival knife, and I do the clutch fasteners on all four corners and pull out the KY-28 control head and disconnect it. And so when I'm coming up the lift, underneath my left arm, you can see the KY-28 head and then my CAR-15. And as I'm coming up, I don't know if you can zero in on it. That's
I want to let people know. Just remember, guys, what he was saying at the very beginning. This is the Cobra tipped over. There's no props left. There's no tail. I mean, literally, he's flying in on the head of a Cobra. I mean, there's no boom, no nothing. And as he said, here he is with his CAR-15, and I'll let Mr. Hugh pick back up here.
Well, the control head is right there underneath my left arm in the crook of my arm, right above the handle for the CAR-15. And then the CAR-15 is across me. And before I went back up, but what I didn't say, I omitted, when the Jolly Green came to a hover over the top of us, the downwash was so great that it blew my cav hat down the hill. And so I lost that cav hat. And before I went back up on the litter, I put my helmet back on. And he had splinted my left leg. If you look closely at the left leg, you can see where he splinted that right above where your cursor is on my upper left thigh above my knee. Put a splint on there because it was fractured. And as I'm coming up the hoist, I'm looking straight up at the belly of this Jolly Green, which is the size of a dadgum bus. And I see the engineer hanging out of the airplane with his hand on the hoist. And I look, and right between his legs, there's another head sticking out. And it was a combat photographer, Air Force, who had a Pentax camera, and he was shooting stills. And he had already shot John Bryant's rescue in film. And it occurred to me that was kind of cool that there's a photographer sticking his head out between the engineer's legs taking pictures. But that's Sergeant Picklesheimer down at the aircraft right there. That's his helmet that you see, and that big thing is his aid bag on his back. And after I go up, the two ARPS and the medic are called back down to where Randy is, and they didn't send a Stokes anymore. They sent down a jungle penetrator. They put they put the medic and one ARP on the jungle penetrator, pulled them up, and then they sent the penetrator back down, and it was the PJ and the sergeant Figueroa. I'm sorry, not Figueroa. The sergeant of the ARPS on the ground was brought up along with the PJ, and then off we went to the 85th Evac Hospital, where John was ultimately moved to, I think, Okinawa. He was badly injured. I had a fractured leg, and I woke up in the hospital, and they had cut off my flight suit when I got to the hospital using shears, and they just immediately, I was wearing Australian flight boots, and I was begging them, don't cut my Australian flight boots, for God's sakes. Just cut the laces, but don't cut the leather. And they did that. They cut the laces, and then they cut my flight suit off. Well, I wake up in the hospital with an IV in me, and I had to go to the bathroom. I had to have a bowel movement, and it was significant. And I hit my little button, and the nurses were all at the end of the nurse station watching Gunsmoke on television. And the nurse came back, and I said, I got to go to the bathroom. And she comes back and hands me a bedpan. And I said, I am not going in a bedpan. I never had before and wasn't about to start. And she said, well, suit yourself, and went back to watching Gunsmoke. So I reached up and grabbed the little stand that the IV was on, and I maneuvered myself down to the men's room. And when I got in there, I couldn't get the stand into the stall because of the cross member over the door was too low for the. So I took the IV bottle off the hook and went in, sat down on the toilet, and put the IV bottle on the floor. Did what I needed to do, got back, put the IV bottle on the stand, went back to the bed. I was very proud of myself. And after about 5 minutes, I didn't realize I had backed up the blood flow in the IV, and it was now full of blood.
Oh.
And the arm was starting to throb, and I had to get the nurse. She was not pleased with me.
Okay.
And they had to clear that. And I said, I got to get out of here. I got a unit to go back to. We were in the middle of the oncoming Easter invasion. And they said, no, you're being evacuated to Saigon. And I just left. It's the only time in my life I left a military medical facility against medical advice. I just got up and went down to the quartermaster. I took my IV out, went down to the quartermaster, and said, give me my gear, I'm leaving. And they gave me back my, I had a 45 in a shoulder holster, my Car 15, my flight helmet, no hat, and my flight suit was cut. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to wear this. And the guy gave me a handful of safety pins. And so I put the suit back on best I could, and I'm safety pinning it together.
Lord have mercy.
45, and I'm carrying a flight helmet and a Car 15. And I walk outside the 85th Evac, which was directly across the street from 24th Corps headquarters at Da Nang. And so I'm standing there waiting for the base bus that will take me back to the flight line, where I hope to get a ride back to my unit with the same Jolly Green guys that picked me up. And while I'm standing there, I look across the roadway, and there's these two MPs from the 24th Corps. Shiny black helmets with MP on it, perfectly pressed uniforms. And here I am. You can't even tell what I was. And this MP walks over, and he looks at me, and he says, where is your hat?
Oh, my God.
And I said, where is your hat, sir? He couldn't see my captain's thing, which was up under my collar.
There we go.
He said, where is your hat? And I said, my hat is somewhere in Laos because I lost it yesterday when I crashed my Cobra. Oh. And about that time, the base bus shows up, and I just ignored that guy and got on he said I couldn't walk around Da Nang looking like I looked. And I got on the bus, went to the 37th R's headquarters, at Da Nang, and I bummed a ride out of those guys and went back to Charlie Horse. And 2 days later, I was flying again with a fractured leg, which never healed right. I still walk funny, and a bad back, which has never healed right. I'm paying the penalty for that these days. But that's the story of that picture. And I didn't realize, I'd never seen that picture until probably 2 months later. The Stars and Stripes newspaper in Vietnam published that picture as a cover picture to our rescue story. And that's how I found out where the picture was, and ultimately found out who the photographer was, and would later meet him years later. I found out that John Bryant had never received a Purple Heart, nor had I, for that mission, and was happy to meet John at Fort Rucker. And the commanding general of the Aviation Center presented us both with Purple Hearts for that mission. And in the audience were a number of my Charlie Horse pilot friends and the combat photographer who took that picture. So that's the story of that. That's the story of that picture. Years after that, very quickly, after that, I was invited to go to the PJ reunion in Herman, Georgia. And we were going to do a surprise for Randy Picklesheimer, who was going to be there. Randy was in terrible shape and medical condition by that point in his career, and could barely see. And I get up and start talking about this rescue in Vietnam, and he's sitting right in front of me. He can't even really see me. And I'm talking about the rescue, and he turns to his wife and he says, "That sounds like one I was on." And I said, "Yes, Randy, I am 701. I was the 701st rescue by the 37th Air Rescue Squadron. John Bryant was 700. So I got to give him a plaque with that picture on it, and a set of my aviator wings and 3rd of the 5th Cav and 17th Cav insignia on it. And then sadly we lost Randy sometime after that. So he's gone. Everyone that flew on my mission to rescue John and I is now dead, with the exception of the flight engineer, who I've never been able to hook up with. The PJ who lost the coin cost to come and get us. Each time they go down, they toss a coin, and whoever wins the flip gets to go on the ground. Randy Picklesheimer won that grip. The guy that lost the flip was Billy Pearson, Airman Billy Pearson. And Billy Pearson was aboard the Jolly Green that went after Ezekiel Hambleton on the Bat-21 mission.
Yes, sir.
And that aircraft was shot down. Everybody aboard was killed, and we lost Billy Pearson. So Pearson's gone, Picklesheimer's gone. Both the aircraft commander and the pilot who rescued me are both passed. And so I think the flight engineer is still alive, but I've not been able to find that guy.
And like I said earlier, that's why it's so vital for you to share this history and talk about it like this, because you're the last man here holding the reins of the story and keeping it alive. And hopefully now, with it being preserved on mine and Jason's, it'll live on in history long after you're gone and long after I'm gone, to where the memory lives on, and the act of valor that those Jolly Greens perpetrated will live on forever. So
I got to tell you, three rescues by Jolly Green in the course of a 30-day period, and they rescued a whole bunch of guys. And the Jolly Greens and the Sandys, the Sky Raider guys.
Oh yeah.
Until you've had a cluster bomb or a rocket go off, within
20 feet,
50 to 75 meters away from you, you don't know how loud those damn things are. I remember one of the things that Randy said when I was trying to shoot the KY-28 in the fog of that event. I remember him saying, "Sit down, Captain, or I'm going to put you down." And so I sat down. But I was messed up. I was probably not right for a couple of days, and some would tell you I hadn't been right since. But I have nothing but the greatest respect for PJs and the call sign Jolly Green and Sandy. They were the best.
So that others may live.
You betcha.
Yep. And we've got a few. I've managed to hook up with the grandson of a 37th AAR, and I will be sharing this interview and this story with him, and maybe he can help dig us up from some information on this, because he's been my go-to guy for that.
I have all the documents from that rescue and the others. I actually stopped in at Montgomery at the Air Force
Maxwell
Museum at Maxwell and pulled all the formerly classified documents.
Excellent.
I'm working toward a sequel to Low Level Hell, and all of this is in there.
Yes.
But I've got all of the insims and the reports of getting shot down, and the after action reports from the Jolly guys and the Sandy guys. I will tell you that the 31 December mission was a big one. We probably had 6 or 8 Sandys. They had to bring call sign Smoke out of Thailand with a whole lot of smoke bombs on the aircraft just to keep the guys covered by smoke. And it was later in 15 when I actually went back to that very point on the ground, recovered parts of Charlie Horse 26's helicopter, and found that the Montagnard village chief, whose house is about 50 yards from where that aircraft went in, the under bracing for his hut were the skids off of that Huey, and they're still there today. Had a wonderful time on that visit, and if anybody out there has a whole bunch of money, wants to invest in the documentary, I'd be glad to talk to them.
I actually was just sent a piece of footage. Let me pull this up real quick before we get into the final viewer questions here and see what you think about this. Helicopter pilot, there it is. September 2nd of 2015. Hugh Mills, 17 former NE soldiers. He visited their villages. This is a little 11-minute clip. I was going to get it into. Wow, these are great photos and video.
Yeah, that's the only picture I've got of me sitting in the back of a Cobra. Is that one right there? I don't know who took that. That's me filling out a flight log.
I will have to screen grab that, because it's actually got your war helmet also. 16 times. I mean, this is crazy, but there is actual. There you are.
Yeah, that's the better half with me arriving in Hanoi. She presents a far more entertaining figure than I do, and those are the guys. Those are 17 surviving members of the 241st NVA, and they met me wearing their uniforms.
That's a bit intimidating, I gotta say, although I know you were ready to get in there and mix it up, but it looks like they came with their game faces on, it looks like here.
Oh yeah, they actually like Sharon a lot. She's much taller than most Vietnamese women, and she's blonde. But
God, look at all this.
The first question that they wanted to know from me, we met in a cafe in Hanoi about 9 o'clock at night, and I had a little interpreter named Zoe, who was a Vietnamese speaker, and she said they want to know how old you were then. And I said, well, then in my second tour, I was 24, and I said, how old were they? And they said, well, they were all about 18. Jeez. And in the Vietnamese society, the position of uncle is a revered position.
Oh, yes.
So they started calling me Uncle Hugh.
No.
And pronounced by a Vietnamese, it was uncomfortably like Uncle Ho.
Yeah.
And they called my wife Sharon Madame.
Wow.
And everywhere we went, if we were walking, they would stop people on their mopeds and offer Sharon a ride on the back of a moped so she didn't have to walk. They were terrific to us.
Wow. What respect.
They also constantly wanted to toast with rice wine.
Oh, non-pay.
And there were 17 of them, and they wouldn't do it at one time. They'd do it once at a time. So I'd have to do 17 rice wines for their one. And I'm honestly not much of a drinker, never have been.
I don't see how you made it through that.
Mothers were trying to get me drunk, and they accomplished that on several of the nights that we were there. We were there for 3 weeks, and actually went back to the place on the ground where all this occurred. All 3 of the shoot downs. We walked the ground. We talked the talk. They told me where they were, when, and what they felt, and it was really terrific. And all of that was captured in documentary footage, which has not yet been produced. I won't go into great detail about what happened, but we lost our funding because of the Me Too movement. Some people that were backing us were kind of blackballed, and but I had a great time. They were wonderful. That's Mr. B right there, and that's a piece of the aircraft which I brought home. That's a piece of 15802, which was my Cobra, and I brought that thing home with me. The Vietnamese said I couldn't have it, and so I put it in my bag and brought it home anyway.
Good for you. I think along with some of the stories in part 2, I think it'd be interesting to show some of that. We won't show it all. It's 11 minutes, but I think showing you meeting some of them and hearing it, and then seeing you in the field, I think will be a good little few minutes of footage we can use in part 2, because there's actually, I don't want to ruin it. I think I'm going to save it for part 2, because there's a story of you actually getting a prisoner, and I think we're going to save that for part 2, because that's a great one, because we're about to hit 2 hours, and I think with the questions we've got, they'll be thick enough that we're going to hit 2 hours. So if it's all right with you, I think we're going to save some good stories for part 2.
That's fine. If there's any questions that are lingering, I'd be happy to answer them.
We're hitting them now, and guys, y'all won't be disappointed. We hold on to some of these stories. They're going to be absolutely mind blowing. Daniel, curious, what was it like flying low and fast in the Loach and the high threat environments you flew in?
Well, it was exciting. We flew at 4 to 6 feet above the obstacles. When we were scouting, we were at 4 to 6 feet. We would run somewhere between 40 and 60 knots. Much faster than that, you really couldn't see everything that needed to be seen.
What is that in miles per hour? I'm sorry, 40 to 60 knots.
We were 50 to 70 miles an hour. Wow. We were close enough to the enemy to smell them. If there were concentrations of enemy troops, we could smell them. That's not a stereotypical thing. That's diet, field hygiene, that sort of thing. Whites of their eyes, I could see them clearly as they were shooting at me and I was shooting at them. It was as up close and personal, probably more up close and personal than infantry combat. But we were very close to them. We were moving fast. Thank God nobody ever taught most of them how to lead an aircraft, because most of the time they hit the rear of the aircraft when they hit it. Sometimes they got lucky and got them up in the front where either I or the crew chief was. But it was very exhilarating. A young 20-year-old scout pilot, be a warrant officer or commissioned officer, all believed themselves to be invisible, bulletproof, and immortal. And I can tell you that it was totally volunteer. No one was forced to fly scouts. If you didn't want to fly scouts, you didn't have to.
Wow.
And some of the guys would fly scouts for 3 or 4 months and then go back to Huey's. Some guys, Rod Willis, Joe Vad, Bob Davis, others on my first tour, flew scouts the entire time. These are guys that truly wanted to do that. And you got more than your share of combat. It was almost a daily basis to encounter the enemy and to exchange gunfire, almost every day. Rare that it wasn't.
There's you and Mr. Rod, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Rod. That's in front of the Scout Hooch at Canto. We were together. We were roommates in 1969. And then he lives here in Kansas City, and that's he and I over at Fort Leavenworth. A couple of months back, we were flying around in a recovered or a restored H model Huey.
Oh,
but Rod and I were the dearest of friends. When I went to Cobra school, I actually stayed with him. He was at Savannah, and I roomed with him. And then when I went back to Vietnam, he volunteered to go back as well. So we both did 2 tours together as scout pilots.
wow, y'all were thick as thieves. It sounds like. Jeez,
I was the pretty one.
I'm sure he'd have something to say. He'd probably say both of y'all were the pretty ones out of the group.
No, he would say he's the pretty one. But I was always his superior by about 6 months. I outranked him by about 6 months. So whenever we were in the unit together, I was the platoon leader and he was the assistant. But we've been dear friends since about July of '69.
Amazing.
And he's still with us too. He's here in Kansas City.
Awesome. We may have spoken about it, but what would you consider your most dangerous mission you ever flew?
I would say the most dangerous mission I ever flew was 28 July '69 when it's in the book. It's the mission called the Crater, the chapter called the Crater.
The Crater.
The ARPs were ambushed, took shelter in a crater, and I flew cover for them for 8.1 hours on the 28th of July. We got them all out. We lost one, August Hamilton, who was hit in the head and did not survive from the ARPs. That and the September mission when the ARPs were overrun. Both of those were Silver Star missions. But arguably those were probably in terms of total time, it's a 30-minute mission versus 8 hours of continuous flight, continuously taking fire. I'd say those 2 missions were the most dangerous.
Yeah, when you're talking as an aerial helo pilot, being in continual contact for 6 to 8 hours, that's insanity. Daniel, what tactics did you develop from the Huey to the Loach to the Cobra to rely on to avoid being shot down?
Well, with the Loach, you didn't want to go into an area the same direction twice. You would always change up your angle of approach to a specific area. We also we performed a maneuver. The Air Force guys would call it jinking. Where you kind of stir the stick like in a circle, and you're popping up and down on the collective, so you're moving all over the place. You're not giving anybody a significantly easy target, so they know exactly where you're going to be. The other thing, keep your eyes open.
Yeah,
we would see the enemy often before they would open fire, and very rarely were we fired upon that we didn't see them before they fired, and sometimes they were waiting to hope we wouldn't see them, and the crew chief had free reign to open up whenever he wanted to in the areas that we flew. We were not in areas occupied by civilians at all. There were no friendlies where we were. You would occasionally run across a tree cutter that was out there cutting trees to make charcoal. You could tell instantly whether it was a bad guy or a friendly, and you didn't run into very many friendlies. But our speed, our altitude, in most cases, we were on top of them before they knew we were coming. If read the chapter called "Hot Dogging It," I was actually able to, without intention, I wound up jumping over a Nipah line one morning early and ran into a 28-man NVA heavy weapons platoon right in front of me crossing an open area. And that was about a 2-minute turning, burning gunfight between my minigun and the crew chief. And we were able to knock off 28 enemy troops and capture all their weapons. The ARPs went on the ground and captured all their weapons. One of those pictures you showed with those weapons,
And one of there's two stories, and I'm sure one of them we're definitely going to cover in part 2 of you talking about how you happen up on them before they even know y'all are around. Y'all find in 2 stories happen up on them on a campfire, and then one time I think, I won't ruin the surprise, but you find the NVA where they're not expecting y'all to be, and they try and disguise themselves. And I'll leave it at that. And
Oh yeah,
so I won't blow
yeah.
the surprise. It's very unique how quick y'all get in and on them.
Well, we were very close to the contact. Scouts were on top of. Cobras usually flew about 1,500 feet AGL. So did the Hueys. In I Corps, maybe a little higher because of the bigger caliber enemy guns. Once the SA-7 was introduced, the Strela surface-to-air missile, then everybody wanted to fly low level. But the speed and the altitude at which we flew made it very difficult for us to be hit. And the good news is when we did get hit, we didn't have all that far to fall.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? Gosh, Daniel, you've got some great questions today. What is a typical pre-mission briefing process for the scout gun mission? If there is a typical pre-mission.
Not as exciting as you would think. Actually, my typical day, if I was going on a VR, I'd link up with whoever my gun was for the day. It could have been any of 10 guys that were aircraft commanders. Usually it was Dean Siner or Chuck Coranda. We lost Chuck here recently too, another good Cobra pilot gone. But they would go to operations and get the mission brief, the grid and the box that we were going to work from operations. I didn't usually do that. I usually went out to the flight line and got my airplane ready, and we would start, they would start. My revetment was right beside the Cobra revetments. And so when I was ready, I just gave them a thumbs up, and usually the scout would lead out. We would take off first. We were slower than the Cobra, and the Cobra would take off after us, and then we'd go up to altitude, and generally the Cobra would lead and I would zip in on the left wing. That's Mike King. That's Dark Horse 1-7 on my third tour. But we would get up on the left wing of the Cobra and go to the point that we were going to work. And then the Cobra would say, okay, I need you to go down where those two streams come together and then head out on a heading at 270. And so I would do that. I'd peel off the wing, go down inbound to that point on the ground, and then head out 270 in a right-hand concentric turns, scouting, looking to see what was there and calling. Everything that I saw, I talked about. And the guys in the Cobra would mark it down on their map for the after action review. But, I carried a map, but it stayed in my map case the whole time. They carried 1 to 50,000. I carried a 1 to 250,000. It's hard to work a map when you're flying. And frankly, after flying the AO every day, I didn't need a map to go to wherever I needed to go for the most part. To a specific grid, yes, but that's what the Cobra was for. I followed Cobras all over Vietnam. And then when it's time to come up, we would take off at a high-speed dash, get up to about 110 knots, and then do a cyclic climb up to altitude, get on the wing of the Cobra, and come back again. So we always flew left wing on the Cobra, and it was a come as you are mission for scout pilots. Just tell me where you want me to go. I'll tell you what I see, and we'll go home. It wasn't any more exciting than that. Our rules of engagement were always the same. They were called Dark Horse rules. No women, no children, no civilians. We didn't have to worry about that because 95% of the time we did not encounter civilians of any kind. You could tell when you're 50 feet away from a guy in an NVA uniform carrying an AK that he is not a friendly sort.
Wow. And I think we'll be covering something later on. I had it in my notes, and but there was a technique you developed. Was it the Hughes, not the stall, but the
Hughes tailspin?
Hughes tailspin. Yes, sir.
The unique nature the unique nature of the Hughes OH-6 aircraft, the military version of the Hughes 500. The rear, I don't know if you've got a picture of the Loach that you could pop up there, but the horizontal stabilizer is not horizontal. It's actually about a 45-degree vertical. You've got the, nah, it's not there.
Oh, I got one right here.
It goes off to the right at an angle of about 45 degrees. And yeah, you can see it. The orange part there, the vertical is the tail, and then the horizontal stabilizer is right there. The current models of the Little Bird have a T-tail. But when you're in a concentric right-hand turn, that low, that angular tail boom or tail structure actually has a flying tendency. It actually can develop lift. And what would happen is the guys would get too slow in a right-hand turn, and that tail would fly, and the aircraft would nose in a corkscrew into the ground. That was called a Hughes tailspin. And it occurred to me one day that pilots are taught to fly on trim. We have a trim ball in the aircraft, and when the ball slides out to the right, you step on the trim, you step on the trim ball to get it back to the center. Any kind of aircraft is flown the same way. And it occurred to me, if I'm in a right-hand turn, I would cross control with the left rudder by pushing the left rudder, which would cause the nose to angle up rather than angle down. And we found that by cross controlling opposite rudder in a slow right-hand turn, that we prevented that tail from lifting and flying. And we had several guys. Chuck Davison, one of my pilots in '69, was darn near killed with a Hughes tailspin. But that's just a pilot technique that you learn through experimenting with what the aircraft will and won't do. And in the Loach's case, it'll do most anything you ask it to do, including some things that I did that I don't talk about because it makes me it encourages people out there to do silly things that I used to do when I was 20, and I don't try not to do that.
Pushing the limits of what man and machine can do. Daniel, what kind of enemy resistance did you typically encounter during a low-level recon?
In I Corps, AK-47 and 30 caliber RPDs, SGM machine guns were what we generally faced. Small arms for the most part. The big killer was the 51 caliber machine gun, essentially their version of the Ma-Deuce, but it was a 51 caliber on a big tripod. That would tear up a helicopter. I've been hit by those 3 or 4 times, and they will knock a blade right off an aircraft. And I Corps on my second tour, much bigger, 23 millimeter twin barrel anti-aircraft guns, 14.5. And then back in the Delta on my third tour, the same thing I had first tour, but then they throw the Strela into the mix. And that about July or so of 1972, we put the infrared diffusers on the back end of the Loaches to move the heat signature of the aircraft up through the rotor system, not out the back. And that was essentially to keep the heat-seeking missiles off of you. I did find, for the most part, the enemy would try not to give their position away. They wouldn't just, in many cases, they wouldn't just open up on you, and they gave us a chance to see them and open up on them first. They were hoping we wouldn't see them, but it's very difficult not to see them in those circumstances.
And when you're flying over, you're as you said, I mean, or we mentioned earlier, you're seeing NVA gather around at campsites, just walking and all of that. Are you guys trying, or did y'all disrupt ambushes that the NVA had set up from the air? Is actually one of our questions.
Especially when we were over the ARPs. Anytime the ARPs went on the ground, we would scout ahead of them routinely. I've got some great shots of the ARPs walking through areas in the Iron Triangle where the vegetation is 4 to 6 feet higher than their heads.
Whoa.
And you can't really see that well, but we could see looking straight down into it. So our position, so long as we scouted ahead of them, was to prevent them from being ambushed. Aircraft ambushes were rare. In some places we encountered Chinese claymores that were set up in trees. One event that I'm aware of, they set a claymore up on top of a hooch with a VC flag on the top of it.
Yes.
And if a guy went in to grab the flag, which was a tendency, they'd blow that claymore, and it actually killed a friend of mine from Arkansas. Specifically, that method killed a scout pilot from Arkansas in a unit that I was associated with.
There's I forget, up in I Corps, the cat killers had an area. I think they were right on the DMZ, to where they the NVA would put up the flag, and they'd constantly, well, not constantly because they'd get in trouble. And I think you may have a story for part 2, but they'd constantly try and bomb that flagpole out into oblivion.
Yeah, that was called the garrison flag. It's in the middle of the DMZ. Yeah, we'll save that story till later. That was, I had an interaction with that flag and the assistant division commander of the 101st.
Yeah, that was quite the call you got on the radio pretty quickly also.
Yeah.
Anthony's curious, what are Mr. Mills' thoughts on drones, specifically combat and surveillance drones, and how they have changed battlefield dynamics?
Study the Ukraine-Russian war.
Absolutely.
I think it's the future. I can't say that I'm all that thrilled about it. I used to have a motto. I've had a lot of mottos. I'd tell people if I had a motto, this would be it. But one of mine has always been, you can't make history in the office. If you're going to be a combat leader, get out in the front and lead. I have watched with great interest the absolute domination of the battlefield by drones and the absolute absence of the attack helicopter from the Russians and the limited use by the Ukrainians. I think it's going to set the tone for how we equip the force in the future. I'm not sure that I'm all that thrilled with it, but I think it's reality. I think we've seen the advanced reconnaissance attack helicopter program killed. It's because of drones, I'm pretty sure. We're looking for a fast mover that's now a tilt rotor. I'm not in a position to know the things that good friends of mine who are general officers know about that process, but I think the tilt rotor's way too big, but it'll hold a lot and it'll go fast a long way. But if you want to know about drones, watch the Ukrainians. They are redefining the battlefield, and they are decimating the ranks of the Soviet army, and we aren't having to do that with the loss of American personnel. So I'm a huge proponent of what the Ukrainians are doing, and I'm a huge proponent to support them as long as we humanly can, because they're doing what I trained to do for many, many years, and we don't have to lose Americans doing it.
Absolutely. And yes, it is. I mean, it's changed so quick, so fast that, God, even though I think I may get demonetized, but the groups who do illegal work down in Mexico that start with a C, they even have started using FPVs to carry out attacks. So, well,
Amazon wants to deliver boxes now in the Kansas City area with drones. Thank God I live underneath the airport traffic area of Kansas City International. So that goes to the ground where I'm living, and I don't think they're going to be flying in here and dropping boxes on my yard. But you take a box off and you put an explosive device on it, and now you're killing Russian tanks. Those guys are good. They are terrific at what they do. I don't know that our capability is as advanced because we don't have as many experiences, but it's an interesting thing to watch. And the total elimination, I've not seen the KA-52 do anything except crash in the highlights that I've seen. The Mi-24 being flown by the Ukrainians, in and out, hit and run tactics. The helicopter has been sidelined in many ways, I think, by the drone. It's a shame. I hate to see it, but I'd rather that than have our own guys get hurt.
Ain't that the truth? Absolutely. Guys, Daniel, you've got 3 or 4 good questions, and I'm going to save those for part 2, considering a lot of that we're going to be talking about in part 2. So here is one of the last ones. Sean is curious about did life expectancy of Loach pilots and torques, I guess he maybe means the ARP guys, get shorter and shorter as the war dragged on?
No, he's talking about gunners. A torque is a euphemism for a gunner. That's a euphemism that largely came out of the 1st Cav Division. They called them torques. We called them gunners.
Wow.
Our gunners were also our crew chiefs.
Learn something new.
You know, during the 68, 69 time frame is when the largest number of loss of aircraft occurred. And as the U.S. started to pull out post 69, of course, the losses went down because there were fewer aircraft there. In 69, I did a survey once, 80% of my guys were casualties. Of the 10 scout pilots that I had in March, there were 2 of us still standing in December. All of my crew chiefs got hurt. I can't think of a one that was not hit. Several of them multiple times. Jimmy Parker was shot through the neck and came back and was shot again. Ken Stormer, they were all shot. Some worse than others. Red Hayes was shot down with a guy from the 1st Infantry Division pony platoon, which was their Loach platoon, but they weren't scouts. They were ash and trash and command and control aircraft. They were trying to learn the scouting technique, and they came over and flew their birds with our crew chiefs to help them, and their platoon leader was killed almost immediately. But it was a dangerous mission. But as we went further in the war, there were fewer opportunities. We lost fewer people in 72 than we did in 69 by a large margin because there were far fewer aircraft troops in Vietnam.
Wow. I mean, it's and after hearing, and I'm sure once reading the book, it's just going to instill more of how dangerous not only you pilots, but the ARP guys and all of that, and y'all's gunners are going to be. It's seeing these Loaches go in, and I've looked up footage of some of the pink teams and all of that. It's just it's mind blowing. It's absolutely mind blowing.
A pink team is a hunter-killer team. Same. Mm-hmm. The white element is the Loach. The red element is the Cobra. The blue element, sometimes called the Blues. In the 1st Cav, they called them Blues. We called them ARPs. But a red element and a white element together was a pink team or a hunter-killer team. 2 scouts working together was a white team. 2 Cobras working together was a red team. We would go out occasionally and do white team operations with 2 scouts. Scouts rarely flew at night. I only flew at night 3 or 4 times under very specific conditions. Because you can't see, you can't fly low level at night and not run into stuff. So we were doing it under flares. Then you got to worry about hitting an expended flare that's in a parachute. And when the flare burns out, you've got this sewer pipe hanging from a parachute. And you run into that and you're done. So we didn't fly scouts at night very often. We did 3 or 4 specific times on specific missions.
That's we've spoken to a few chopper pilots doing resupplies, but some gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the birds, the 131st recon birds. I can't think of the names of them, but them flying at night, and you couldn't have paid me money to fly those things near the Ho Chi Minh Trail at night.
You know, I went in, we had a OH-58 pilot in 69 who had engine trouble, and he sat down on Highway 13 at night. thought he was going to be captured, so he buried his signal operating instructions. And then it occurred to him that he might be able to fix it. So he got the aircraft started again, took off, and flew back to Milloy, and then told his commander that he buried his SOI. And we had to take the ARPs out there at night. So that would have been in January, February of 69, because I was flying Hueys. And we inserted those guys at night, and they dug around the dirt around Highway 13 until they actually found the SOI, and we went in to get them. And as we were coming out, I was in the left seat of the Huey. The only time I ever had vertigo or spatial disorientation in my career, which is pushing 50 years of flying now. The only time I had it was that night coming out and in a left-hand turn, and I thought I was going right, and I was going left. So thank goodness you fall back on your training. You watch your instruments and don't believe what your brain is telling you. Actually, it's your inner ear. But the scary stuff. Huey guys, who got shot down more than any aircraft in Vietnam? Hueys, hands down. Pilots that were killed, Hueys. There weren't that many Loach pilots compared to Huey pilots. So Loaches were dangerous, but Hueys were quantitatively more dangerous than Loaches because there were more of them. We just had greater exposure to ground fire than Hueys did. But the guys that carried the bulk of the Vietnam War were the Huey guys.
I can't even imagine, and it's weird that you just mentioned about vertigo. It's what we're going to end with a question about vertigo of sorts, but I literally just had my first bout with vertigo, and I cannot imagine you being in an aircraft getting a case of vertigo. I mean, that leaves me speechless. I can't.
The only other time I had a bout of vertigo was 1972 when I left the and I'm gonna stand up here for a minute. I left the CAV, and we had a tradition that said when you leave the CAV and you're a scout pilot, this was the mug. This was the Outcast mug. It's made from a 105 millimeter round, and they would fill this thing up with a shot of everything at the bar.
Oh.
And then they'd top it off to the top with creme de menthe. And they would call it a green MF. I'll let you define it. Mm-hmm. And you had to drink this thing. I mean, you had to chug it. Stand on a chair and chug it. And I did that in August or September of 72 when I was leaving Dark Horse for the last time. And my idiot brother, Rod Willis, stood up and said, "Wait a minute, he's a second tour Dark Horse. He ought to have to do 2 of them." Oh. And so I did. And the result was vertigo. I've never been so sick in my life. And I woke up the next morning strapped to the railing of our tropical hooch with a cargo strap where I'd been dry heaving all night. But I will tell you, this is the most prized possession I've got. This mug has served the final toast to the CAV for everybody that flew with Dark Horse from 69 through the unit leaving Vietnam in 1972. So if you want to experience vertigo, fill that thing up with alcohol and chug it.
That's a beautiful piece of Vietnam history right there.
It is.
You crafty enough.
This is what I want to be cremated in and put in the Loach airplane. So I'm still pitching that to Doug Mitchell.
Bringing it full circle. And our last question today, I'm saving the other ones for part 2, is just what we spoke about. There we go. How did you deal with disorientation or navigation issues during a fast-paced flight?
The fast-paced flights, the gunfights, the turning gunfights, you didn't navigate. You just fought the fight, and we knew where we were. We knew what was going on. Army aircraft did not have the navigation gear that Navy and Air Force aircraft have. We didn't have VORs, variable omni-range receivers. We didn't have TACAN, tactical air navigation. we had a handheld map and a stopwatch. That's what we had. Handheld map, time, distance, and heading. You flew the AO enough every day that you pretty well knew it. The big things, I could get to any fire base or any major base, Dao Tiang, Song Bay, Quan Loy, An Loc, Lai Kei, the division headquarters. Those were easy. It was finding a unit in the bush that was a little more difficult. And we would use FM homing on occasion. It didn't work all that great. You could go to an FM frequency of an infantry unit and home into them with a needle. They didn't work all that great. And there was no, there were no points of navigation at night. If you flew at night in Vietnam, it's not like flying in the United States where you can see towns for miles away. You couldn't see anything, pitch black. So when we, especially in Cobras, when we went out to shoot for guys at night, it was time, distance, and heading, get them up on the radio, have them put a strobe light inside a helmet turned upside down so we could see it, but the guys lateral couldn't. And then you'd shoot off a strobe light. Give me an azimuth off that strobe light 75 meters and put your head down. We're coming in with rockets. The closest I've ever shot was 25 meters with 20 millimeter. And it scared me to death. I was scared to death I was going to hit the guys. I had a Cobra, hit the ARPs in 69 with a chunker. 40 millimeter got away from him and hit one of the ARPs. Thankfully, it didn't kill him. It just hurt him. But shooting close air support for the Army is a heck of a lot closer than the Air Force. The Air Force, it's hundreds and hundreds of meters. With the Army, it's like 25 or 30. You got to worry about that, but you get so good at it. You're doing it so often that you got the job done when you needed to get it done. You just didn't like to do it real close because you didn't want to hurt anybody. But navigation wasn't an issue. We flew the area every single day.
You guys can, that's like our bird dog pilots that talk about when they'd fly at CCC. They flew that same route so many times. Anything out of the ordinary, boom, they instantly picked up on it. It just becomes, like you said, second nature.
Yep, that's true. Bird dogs are neat airplanes. The only airplane in the Army that has 60 degrees of flap on it, and you can put that sucker wherever you want to if you're a good bird dog pilot.
We've spoken to some wild and crazy ones throwing grenades or hanging out with their Car 15 shooting, and those bird dog guys are a wild bunch as well. But we've hit well over 2 hours, and I apologize for that. But we've got questions ready and saved, and we'll just put a pin in this for part 2 till after the book arrives. And is there anything you'd like to close with before we shut down, sir?
No, I appreciate the time. I've gotten a lot of exposure because of Low Level Hell. It's a good book. It's all those people are real. All those events are real. You can get it on Amazon.com and
I put a link in the show notes, guys. Go ahead and jump over there and order it so we can read it together and be ready for part 2.
Yep. It's a true portrayal of how scouts flew in the 1st Infantry Division. Every scout unit was a little different. Some guys had 2 up front and none in the back with a minigun. We flew 1 up, 1 back. It's what worked for us. On both of my tours, we flew the same way in scouts. But I appreciate the opportunity. Glad to talk about it. Not many people know a lot about the scout mission in Vietnam because there weren't that many of us. There were only 880 something Loaches that went to Vietnam, and all of those weren't scouts. Some of them were command and control aircraft. But the air cav troops had 1 platoon that flew scouts, and that was the scout platoon, and that's probably the greatest experience of my life is those 2 tours as a scout pilot.
Wow. Yes, sir. I literally knew nothing coming into this except for listening to you on podcasts, and I'm quite glad that we're ordering the book, and we'll be able to hook up for a part 2 once I get a little more educated. So I think we'll put a pin in it, and we'll just stay in touch. And after I get the book in, we'll pick a day out that works best for both of us.
Yep. Circle back. Glad to do it.
All righty, sir. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, guys. Bless you.